determined and locally led action. And so there is some space holder, some budget line, if you want, in the strategic plan. But at least some of us that have observed the fund think it should be quite significantly enlarged from what is currently in there. So the question would be, would you see that as something where Germany can bring its clout to the table? And again, you have, I think, a moral authority by not only hosting the replenishment conference in early October, but obviously being one of the biggest and earliest contributors for the replenishment and getting that done. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like?
Yeah, thank you very much, Liane. Indeed, I'm quite new to the GCF. Very much looking forward to working with you in this important international climate fund. And I have followed as advisor for the last couple of months the discussions and be involved in the discussions around the strategic plan. And indeed, that's an important document that defines the strategic goals for the next years of the Green Climate Fund. It's still ongoing discussions around the plan. You mentioned it. It hopefully gets approved in July at the next board meeting. And I can say that we have made, and in the last meetings, we have made statements for having more inclusive activities, for having more locally led solutions, for the fund being more inclusive in a general manner. And that also means to have gender responsiveness at every strategic goals, and not only as a vulnerable group, but also, for example, having gender in the more gender balance in the board, which means decision making, which is not an easy task because that's a sovereign decision by every board member who it will send to the board. But we have seen that on the paper, the GCF, I think, is very well set in terms of gender responsiveness. The independent evaluation report has shown, as I said before, that it's not always translated into actions on the ground. So it would be interesting to hear today your ideas and views. How can we make sure that what we have on the strategic side is also translated into work plans and into concrete actions on the ground, and what are the barriers for that? That would be very insightful. Thank you.
Definitely, and I think that we are going to come as well on those different recommendations along we are speaking. And let me now introduce Madeleine Diouf, Head of Climate Change Division in Senegal's Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. Parties, primarily national governments, are the main recipients of climate finance that is channeled through dedicated climate funds and also through different bilateral support efforts. So, Madeleine, what steps can the majority of the world, also called in this space as developing countries, undertake as recipients to facilitate that climate finance and the benefits of climate finance directly support women's and feminist organizations and therefore as well gender equality? What are some of the political and technical barriers that a recipient country at a recipient country level countries can experience, and maybe some thoughts on how to overcome them? The floor is yours, Madeleine. Thanks.
Thank you for inviting me to join this important events dedicated to how to increase the participation of gender in climate action at all levels. I think this is really something that needs to be effectively emphasized and increased. And I do think that it's more and more important that in all countries, in particular I'm coming from LDC's group countries, from Africa and from all developing countries, that the role of gender, of women in responding to climate be well undertake everywhere. So saying that we, regarding the climate finance at the national level, we need some document of reference. There are some planning documents that need to be developed. First, I want to talk about the NDCs, the National Determined Contribution. So it will be great also to see in countries how the gender consideration is being treated in the National Determined Contribution, because it's also this contribution we're going to have to report back, and it will be great really to see how the countries will report back on how they have integrate gender in their commitment. The other one is also the NAPS, the National Adaptation Plan. So many countries are actually developing the National Development Action Plan. And I think that the NAPS is really important. NAPS is the vehicle for adaptation. And we know that most of gender are concerned by women are concerned by adaptation, in particular for small countries like small LDCs like Africa, where we can really help these women really to build their resilience, to really have opportunities also to have support in order really to build their resilience. We have also many countries working on LTS, long-term, long strategy pathway for low carbon development. I think also it's also another area where we can have also women participation, gender support participation. If I take the case of many African countries, many LDC, small islands, we used to have biomass energy. So we go to look at fuel charcoal, all these things. So it's more and more ladies who do that. They have solutions, improve stocks, improve cook stuff. So how to ensure that they are part of a solution? So I'm talking about that because in Senegal we have a GCF project on cooking stove. It's been managed by GIZ, and it's something we're doing with Kenya. It's two countries concerned, and it's totally dedicated to women, because they are the ones who are using biomass energy, and allowing them to access to clean energy or better clean energy, but is also having impact on their health is really high. And I think this kind of example need to be multiplied. So I'm saying that because this is an entry point for any countries to make the link between your demand to the different windows, finance windows, and why you demand that. So I'm calling also to ensure that countries are having this capacity to integrate in the gender plan the NDCs, because most of the countries have a gender plan, action plan at the national level. So what is the link with the NDC? What is the link with the NAPS? What is the link with the LTS or whatever planning document we're having on climate change, to be sure that this will be a good element, a parameter for calling for finance. Saying that, I just want to echo the local-led adaptation. I think it's really important. And we as LDCs, I am also actually chairing the LDCs group, we're looking really to increase the finance to local-led action on the ground, because also it's an opportunity to take on board women need and build their capacity, because we are, and you mentioned GCF is key, we are in this process to mainstream adaptation. We are in this process to change the paradigm, integrate climate change, and we can't do that without women. So it's highly important really to see this link between bringing access to finance, but building also the capacity at the different local level with women on how to mainstream adaptation on very different area of intervention. So how to overcome, I think I am talking about that. What are the barriers? If I look at many developing countries, in particular LDC, Small Island, Africa, is the entity. There is a lack of national entities who have the capacity, who have been accredited by GCF or the Adaptation Fund. So it's more international who are coming and are accredited. So there's a need really at the national level in African countries, in LDC, Small Island, to increase the direct access. This is really important. This will allow really to allow the financial climate fund resource to flow in the countries, because you have one or two entity or international quantity. They have too busy to do. So how to open it and make more direct access? So it's maybe something we have to ask to GCF to increase the direct access opportunities within countries. The other issue is, as I say, capacity to develop projects in line with GCF requirement, in line with adaptation. I think this can come up, so it's something that we need to also increase. And I would calling really to the feminists to work also with on development of project with women organization, really to help them to increase this capacity. The other point I want to make is the monitoring. We're going to move on because when you have your NDC, your NAPS, whatever, you have to report back. We have what we call the BTR who coming. So I'm sure that we need also to see how we can really have this tool for reporting back, for the high impact we're doing on the ground with women. I think this is really important. And how to bring it in the discussion we're having. Because we have a discussion on GST, but we're having a discussion on GGA, on Global Goal on Adaptation. How we take that on this process, I think, is also important. And I think these are also elements that need to be more and more integrate and the monitoring aspects through the different experiences, how we can build that and bring it to the GGA process also is important. So we really want to highlight also the other issue, how to ensure that at the national level there is key collaboration between a national institution and also women local organization, and how to increase that. And I think this is also something we need to really improve in the coming year. I will stop there. Sorry, I see someone saying me.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I think that you have done very great points, particularly bringing the importance or the necessity of bringing direct access. When we talk about climate finance, how important it is that we push for this. So now we have been already talking a little bit about giving some context, giving some different particular views from different contexts. Let me come back to you, Liane. Liane, you are, as an associate director of the H-Böll, you have been emphasizing your work on a feminist analysis of those macroeconomic policies, focusing on climate finance flows and the equitable access to climate funding, right? Thinking about that institutional structures, like starting from the beginning, right? And over the past 10 years, dedicated climate funds and climate finance mechanisms have made significant strides in gender integration efforts, but despite this, simplifying and enhancing direct access for local communities, what we were discussing now, and in particularly for women and feminist groups, remained elusive. It's almost zero, no? It's like the percentage is not even 2%. So what are some of those core impediments at fund levels, and what are some of those steps that can lead to a more gender transformative climate finance delivery from that macro perspective? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gina. This is a very good and very complex question. Maybe just starting out, obviously, the multilateral dedicated climate funds, as the bilateral funders, as MDBs and so on, are important, but particularly the multilateral climate funds have a relatively small amount of the financing. Nevertheless, I think their core value is in signaling within the broader architecture what needs to be done and what can be done. And so I would challenge them in particularly to do better. As I indicated, all of them have gender policies and have a gender mandate. And the Green Climate Fund actually was the first dedicated climate fund that started out having a mandate, you know, when we approved the operational, basically the operational framework in 2011. However, policies and mandates do not translate necessarily into successful implementation. That's also something that Lena mentioned, and we need to look why that is not the case. So one of the core problems is that we are demanding a certain level of gender analysis, you know, for example, for proposals to come forward. So every proposal has normally, at least in the Green Climate Fund, but increasingly in other funds as well, a gender analysis. It's hopefully a human rights and intersectional analysis, more broader, and not just gender as an opportunity analysis, and we have seen really good analysis happening. However, quite too often that analysis is outsourced. It's given to a consultant who is then not involved in actually framing and developing the project itself, right? So it's basically a standalone or a side note, rather than actually informing how you would do the project. That has been a big problem. The other problem is that some of the requirements, and Madeleine spoke to that, for funding or to get a fundable project proposal forward are getting harder and getting more and more difficult in a lot of the funds. The Green Climate Fund, I think, is a very good one. Particularly for adaptation, it's been very difficult to do what they in the GCF call the climate rationale, to explain how something is not development but is adaptation, which obviously in the implementation on the ground, that differentiation really does make very, very little sense, but it does make in a financing approach, unless, and that's the point, you go in and finance with full cost grants. You basically say, this is what we want to do. It might have some development components, but again, we are funding a lot of development stuff outside that is supposed to have some climate components, and you just fund the whole measure. So you get rid of some of the requirements of data and otherwise proving that it's really adaptation and nothing else. Other parts is obviously enhancing and simplifying direct access. That can be done in several ways. One is obviously reducing the paperwork. For those smaller projects that you know, they don't have much environmental and social risks. They are probably just using grants, so you have no financial intermediation. Why don't you make it as simple as possible? Why don't you take a risk with the small actors and the local actors, where we see lots of climate fund being willing to take risks on big projects when they involve the private sector? So we need to reverse the risk understanding. It's not risky to involve local community, women's and feminist groups that know the best what their adaptation context is. The real risk is having multi-country, financially intermediate, for example, large-scale equity projects, where you don't even know what the individual activities under that framework are when the project is approved, and there is very little transparency on follow-through because it's a private sector project. So that's the one thing. The other thing is we need to involve women's groups, the women's machineries in countries way more as implementers, see them as partner in implementation, not just as recipients. And particularly, excuse me, in contexts where the structure of the fund makes it very hard to get money directly, right? So there you could say, why wouldn't we, if there is a capacity building component in a project for awareness raising on climate change in a country, why would we do that through a UN agency that brings in their advisors? Why wouldn't the UN agency that does the overall project for the Green Climate Fund, for the Adaptation Fund, be compelled, be mandated that they try to use local groups, local women groups for that task? That's a principle that it's called subsidiarity. That means you implement at the most local level possible. We don't have that as a mandate for the funding implementation in most of the fund. We should have it. And then the last point that I want to make, because that's something that we, and Titi is one of my sisters that has been fighting with me and others in the Green Climate Fund and in other climate funds for a long time. This is trying to actually really get money directly to subnational and local actors. And so, for example, something that we have called for in the Green Climate Funds that some other funding instruments already have, that we want as a dedicated window in the new loss and damage fund that we are all calling for, is actually a micro and small grant or community window, whatever you call it, which would make sure that you actually not go through the national government for that part, but actually through a secretariat of a fund can apply directly for some small money or smaller financing sources that you implement with as little paperwork as possible. So I think it's changing the discourse. Again, be willing to take a risk with local actors, put some money where you say your risk appetite is, and then build on some of the existing structures that we have both inside funds for grant mechanisms, as well as the experiences that we have for a lot of philanthropic small-scale grantors already out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Liane. And I would like from there, if there is a comment or not, but if I would like to take from there as well one of the points that you did on the risk, no, on this understanding of risk. When these funds, it's less risky to go to those big, large projects instead of those local initiatives needs that have already shown evidence on when we have a gender responsive, a gender analysis that really goes throughout the whole development, implementation, design of the project, and really brings a systemic change. Why not to do that? And that's why I would like to, with this kind of move to our next speaker, to Titi Soentoro. Yeah, this is beautiful. Executive Director of AXI. Because with this risk, and also with your experiences, and also thinking about the context in which we are in these negotiations, we have been talking about those structural issues of the climate crisis that have been led by different industry interests, by different capital interests, no? And we see how corporate capture is even getting into this space more and more and more, where those extractivist powers are wander the corridors, and when promoters of different dangerous destructions creep as well into the discussions that we are having here. But it's definitely something that is not only happening in this landscape or discussions, but it's also being a capture that is happening in the climate finance landscape. When the climate finance, the funding are benefiting other interests, but not those or to whom it should be serving. So channeling, for example, funds for mega projects instead of responding to those local needs. So Titi, because we know that you have been working in this topic, could you extend a little bit more on this problematic from your experience? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gina. So you read it, Titi Soentoro from AXI Indonesia. So this is the experience for more than 20 years monitoring projects in Indonesia and also monitoring policy drafting at the MDBs like World Bank and Asian Development Bank. So first two situations that might also similar to the situations of grassroots women in our country, in the developing countries. So one is Ning. She is called Ning. She lives in the coastal area of Java. So like 10 years ago, the coastal line was like 3-4 kilometers from her house. And right now, the coastal lines is on her yard. And the communities, because they think it's the wave and the water keep coming, they just buy sand sacks, what do you call it, soil, and then put in front to make like a small dam. But it doesn't work because the water keep coming, and then force the community to go away from that place. So going away from that place, it means loss of properties, loss of livelihood, and loss of many things. And they have to go for new places, new life, and so on. It's hard for the women. And then when they ask the local governments what to do, whether there is a support from the governments, because they have to move all the family, the government, the local government say, you look, you know, it's God's wills because it's natural disasters, what we can do. So it means if we see this in the situations, the women experience the climate crisis disaster, but they are not aware yet, not informed, the link between the sources of the crisis, the whole negotiation we have here, and how it can support their life. Therefore, we need the funds, the women needs the funds, but more important is how to empower them that they can make decision on how the funds also decide according to their needs and situations. So the second situation is about Ati. She lives on foot of a volcano in Central Java. We have around 400 volcanoes. So 17,000 islands, 400 volcanoes is on the ring of fire. And then one day she was shocked because the water from the tap was muddy, brown colors. And then she looked outside. The fish pond is also muddy because the area is very fertile, a lot of water, because it's a volcano, and volcano is always fertile beside the explosion, but yeah, it's gone. And then the whole village were in panic because suddenly everything was muddy. And they look at each other and then say, what happened? Why is this happen? And they build a committee and then send the groups up to the mountain because it's come from the mountain. And it turns out a company is drilling for geothermal, for the exploration, without any, of course, lack of waste management. They just cut the tree on the volcano and then just throw it, and then the rain come, all, everything was destroyed. So geothermal is one of the, energy source promoted by the World Bank, by the ADB, by GCF for Indonesia. The plan is about 30 or 400 sites of geothermal. We warned already the GCF member when they discussed about that. Look, Indonesia is in the ring of fire. There's a lot of earthquake, because geothermal operation can trigger earthquake. Earthquake can also trigger problems to the operation. So it's risky. And then women were not informed, community are not informed. And when they ask the local government, they say, this is a national vital projects because we want to involve in the program to reduce emission. So what in Indonesia, if you say national vital projects, it means don't touch it, don't resist it. Otherwise you will be oppressed, and then you will be intimidated and so on. So it means if we see this, people are not informed, people are not discussed if there should be a decision about projects. So that's the situations with the women. And then the question maybe can answer Lena's question is, there is a lack of gender safeguard in the provision of the funds. For example, how to do gender impact and risk assessment, how to involve women in the decision-making processes, how to have gender-responsive information, don't put information in the office, but really the place where women are gathered, and so on and so on. That's what we need. We need funds, but not only the funds, but we need also the empowerment of women so they can decide what they want to do with the funds according to their need and, of course, according to their situations. I will stop it here.
Thank you, Titi. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that and for putting that in a very clear manner that we all and also our audience and listeners online can understand it. Lena, would you like to come on that point?
Yeah, thank you very much, Titi, for that insightful contribution. I fear I don't have the answer yet. But it underlines a little bit what I've said in the beginning in my intervention, that we have to look more closely on the implementation side and not only on the paperwork. I think we have, from what I understood until now, quite a good gender mainstreaming basis in the Green Climate Fund established from the very beginning, actually, from the governing instrument. But we see it's not always responsive on the ground. So there has to be some work on looking exactly what's missing. So there were some ideas already on this panel to channel more funds to locally led solutions. I think that's was one of the ideas, to have a better assessment before the projects, to have gender analysis. To really know what are the specific barriers, what are the specific needs. And this not only for smaller projects, but I think for all projects. And I don't think that big or mega projects are generally not responsive to the ground. It has, all of them have to be responsive to people and to nature. And we have to make sure that in all kinds of projects we have those assessments. And if they are not there, we as a Green Climate Fund, as the board, is, as you said, a specific fund, have this responsibility in looking at this more closely. It's a board of 24 countries, or two constituencies, a lot of people deciding about the projects, and this is always going to be part of the discussions, and it has to be anchored in the strategic plan. I agree with Liane, and I'm also grateful for these specific insights of projects. They have to show that implementation has to be more conscious. But as I said, I think this goes to all the big projects, the smaller projects, and I think it's a question of having a good mix of both. We also need the bigger projects for different aspects of mitigation or adaptation. It's a more question of having a good mix of both, but all of them being gender responsive, I think this is key. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response, and taking as well a little bit from one of those recommendations that you made. I would like to bring our panelist that is joining us online, Anna Samwel, co-director of WECF Georgia office, because one of the recommendations that you were making was on channeling more fund to locally led solutions. Yeah, and WECF Georgia particular has been working with different local organizations on energy-led mitigations actions, no, in the energy sector, and in that journey, we know, Anna, together with your team, you have applied to funds, no, to advance on the implementation on such local women-led solutions. However, there have been some barriers on that, right? And some maybe barriers, but as well some really like steps that have completely stopped the implementation of such initiatives. So what are those barriers that you have encountered, and how were you able to overcome it? Like, tell us a little bit more about that experience that I think is very linked and come very well in the conversation now. The floor is yours, Anna. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Gina and panelists. Yeah, indeed, my experience links very well to what has been previously said. We have been, together with our partners and the communities, experimenting with different energy technologies to address rural energy poverty, reduce the unpaid labor for women and men, and to reduce deforestation, as firewood is the main source of energy for heating and water heating. It turned out that solar water heaters and energy efficient stoves and insulation proved very effective in reducing emissions while improving also the lives of the rural women and men. Also, the government understood that we need to address the issue of rural energy poverty while tackling the climate crisis. So they requested us to develop a national mitigation action, a NAMA, which was also incorporated into the INDC, the predecessor of the NDC. The NAMA was developed with many stakeholders together. It was highly visible and valued, and it was addressing multiple SDGs. However, unfortunately, despite applying 3 times to the NAMA facility, the project has not been financed. And up until now, GIZ has submitted a similar project to the GCF, and they did receive funding, but we or other women organizations are not involved anymore. However, the demand for the technologies is still high, and the communities keep on asking for implementation, and energy poverty in the rural areas is skyrocketing. As a consequence, forests are disappearing, so it's still very urgent that something is being done here. And to keep going, we have been trying to spread the technologies in a commercial way with very little funding. And this is very challenging due to widespread female poverty and a lack of a just financial mechanism. So it's although technologies have a quite short repay period, they are not yet accessible without any climate funding. As a last resort, we are currently developing a project which is based on carbon credits to set up an accessible and just financial mechanism. Yeah, with this example, I want to echo what has been said before, and yeah, to emphasize that there is seed funding available. Women organizations and communities are very well able to develop solutions that address the climate crisis and poverty. But then when these solutions that have been tested and are available are ready for upscaling, there is no funding accessible for us. The biggest share of the climate finance is not reaching the grassroots levels, even though it's probably most needed there. And if we also saw that if it's available, it's only accessible for the bigger organizations that often lack the perspectives of women from the ground and the connection with the target groups. Yeah, so I would like to join the plea for my co-panelists for more accessible climate funding for grassroots and women organizations. Indeed, not only small pilot projects, but also, yeah, we are ready to work as co-implementers and implementers. We cooperate with the government and communities as well. So thank you very much. Back to you, Gina.
Thank you so much, and I think that applause, yeah. I think it gives us as well part of those different reality checks that we are having, no? Like how it looks into the paper, what we were talking, but also the different constraints that different organizations experience when accessing these type of funds. I don't know if any of the panelists has a comment on what has been said before we move to the next question. Okay, Liane.
I think in that case, particularly, I think that highlights or reinforces some of the recommendations that I've made, right? So in that case, there was very strong country ownership. It was supported by the country. It's not quite clear whether the issue was that, you know, for example, in the GCF or otherwise, they felt there was not the right implementing entity. But I think if with a similar project coming forward, and some organization like the GIC should have actually put it on themselves, knowing that there was similar previous work done, to try and see, and I would think this is the responsibility of those that can access finance, to see if they could have incorporated, you know, your element as a part of the project. Could have been a project component, you could have been an implementing entity, you could have exactly done what you said, try to upscale the experience that you had. And again, I think it goes back to particularly organizations that come from the global north, that have the access, that have the expertise. GIC is a very much a climate finance capacity builder in accessing climate finance. In that case, the best capacity building would have been in allowing your organization, the groups on the ground, the climate finance, and to learn by upscaling and implementing upward. And again, that's where I think some of the mandates, whether you call it subsidiarity, whether you call it, you know, you need to work with groups that are already there and have some experience, however you want to call it, it doesn't matter. But I think it just has to be made a requirement for any global north or international organization to facilitate that kind of engagement from the ground and from the national, local and national context. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Liane. I think that, and while you were speaking on that, I think your words resonate as well with having a decolonial feminist climate finance approach, right? Kind of a stepping out and saying as institutions, no, like we can do this, we can step out, we can support the work that has been already done, no, to enhance and to strengthen local activities that have been happening on the ground. And getting related to the experience that has been expressed by Anna, and linking also on barriers, but as well some different models and alternatives to overcome those different type of barriers, I would like to bring to the floor Agnes Mirembe, who is the Executive Director of ARUWE in Uganda. Because there has been also different experience, but something amazing has been happening, and is the way, no, that on the ground women can get together in cooperation, in solidarity, to overcome those different barriers, because the emergency of acting is there, right? And when the emergency is there, we cannot wait until in these conversations governments say, oh yeah, let's do it, right? Let's channel that, you know, and concretize that willingness into tangible actions. And ARUWE has been leading a collective work in Uganda that responds to many of those different challenges that we have been speaking today, that we have been discussing on access, on financial flows, on gender barriers, particularly for women in all the diversity. So what are those barriers that local women, from your experience, have as well, have experience on accessing that funding, but how it has been, what is needed, no, to support women's leadership, the implementation of the projects from your experience and different projects? The floor is yours, Agnes. Thank you.
Much, Gina, and thank you so much, panelists. Yes, my name is Agnes Mirembe, and I work with ARUWE. ARUWE is Action for Rural Women's Empowerment, and we work with rural women, smallholder farmers in rural areas. Now, we are working in a community which is really predominantly male-dominated. And such societies make it very difficult for rural women to participate in, say, for example, key development processes, key processes that could actually empower them and also bring them on board to make really decisions that are really gender responsive. We are seeing in these communities, there's a lot of social, cultural, constructed norms that are really marginalizing the women and really deterring them from participating effectively in a society where women do not really have access to owning key resources, like, for example, land, which would actually be a very key important resource in sometimes accessing some of these things. So we are seeing these women, the rural women, really taking and implementing most of the gender roles, taking part in most of the things that they have to do, looking up the care work, looking after their families, but also participating so much in the agriculture sector. Like, I should say for sure, 70% of the women in Uganda are contributing towards the workforce, but they're experiencing a lot of challenges to really enable them effectively implement successful and meaningful ventures. Say, for example, in renewable, because they can't access, like you said, finances. One, because I have mentioned that they are really preoccupied, the time poverty, doing quite a lot of things, and not so much involved, not given an opportunity to participate and air out what they really need to do. There is a problem, and I heard it being mentioned, there's a problem of lack of knowledge. Because you are really busy as a woman, doing so much, but you really have no opportunity for you to have, to participate in those spaces where you can really get information to you clearly. So there is a lot of information gap. They do not have knowledge about the existing, if they're there, existing climate, climate financing opportunities. You find that most of the women, in the times that they have to be in places where they should get the information, they're so much busy and they're so much preoccupied with work that is not even recognized. And so these opportunities bypass them. And I must tell you for sure that the women that we are working with, their literacy level is very, very low. And you find that if this information comes, the contractual documents are very difficult for them to interpret. The language, the terminology, because they did not get an opportunity. I should tell you that we are working with over 10 cooperatives, and these cooperatives have about 300, 500, 600 women, but 90% of the women did not get an opportunity to go through primary education. So when these agreements, when this information comes, it's very difficult for them to make meaning out of it, especially the financial literacy. It is true that most of the women in the rural areas that we are working with cannot really make meaning out of this information. And then it leaves, because knowledge and information would actually be an opening opportunity for them to really access. And so if this information does not come to them, if they're not aware, it's quite difficult. Don't forget, I also mentioned that the men are really controlling and accessing the key resources, including, for example, a very simple example that I can give you, a radio. It is a man who is going to be on that radio, listening to different things that do not matter. And a woman would really want to listen to that kind of information that would benefit them. But the men are listening to politics. The men are listening, not that politics is bad, listening to football. And so you find that the woman is really missing on that. And the other thing that I mention is the cultural barriers. Now, if the grants are not there, if the information is not there and the grants are not there, they do not really have options. The women would really want to go and probably get loans, which we do not actually, which would not recommend. Personally, I will tell you that I got a loan because I'm an agricultural person, I farm, a loan of 24% interest because I had no alternative. But that keeps us in the cycle. And so if these women really cannot have access to grants, they are forced into getting these loans. But it's very difficult, I should tell you, because they do not own the land, and you have to have collateral in my country to have access to land. And so that, definitely, you have missed out on an opportunity of, a grant to probably help you in your climate renewable probably initiative, and so you get into getting a loan, which you cannot get because of collateral. But the cultural issues that are there in my community, you definitely have to get, permission from sometimes your husband. It's very, very unfortunate that even when you think you should really take up this opportunity if it's there, but your spouse has to permit you. And if they say no to that, it's very difficult for you really to go into getting it because they said no. And so those socially constructed cultural barriers have really deterred women from getting, access to grants, but also loans. I must also tell you that it's unfortunate, but we do not have tailored, and I had Liane mention, we do not have tailored grants that are really focusing on, say, for example, climate initiatives, renewable energy. We are doing programs and programs that would actually solutions that are gender responsive, but those grants are not yet there. It's very difficult to get such a grant that is tailored, that is a window for a woman, and that a woman can really easily access, because if it's gender tailored and it's responsive, then it should really address the gaps, the needs of the women. But unfortunately, they are not yet there. And that actually becomes very, very difficult. But what are we doing? What can we do? And I just want to agree that we should probably advocate and really advocate for specific, women grants, the windows that can really allow and give an opportunity for women. Because these grants, as they come, they are competed for with women. And like I said, men are already having more opportunities to access them. But if we could have tailored, design gender responsive, windows where women should know for sure, where women can go and get access to these grants. This would help them. This would enable them really to put up very, key actions, renewable actions, like I would say, for example, agroecology that would benefit them, to help them actually, for example, improve on their livelihood. But I'm really advocating, we are saying that this support should be actually getting into simple, but because if it's women, they should actually address their concerns. And so the investment should go, for example, we are doing, she mentioned, we are working with these cooperatives, say, for example, to produce briquettes using, waste, because it's very difficult for us, say, for example, to access high investments to do bigger projects. But these small cooperatives, women in their cooperatives can really get the money to be invested in these briquettes. I should tell for sure that initial investment for such actions are very expensive. Say, for example, having a briquette machine can cost us 4,000, 5,000 euros. But if the women are organized and supported into these investments, it can really help their land conserve, because these are technologies that are also helping to reduce the emissions. But we also have village civic schemes. The women, local women, have local knowledge. They have ways of, mobilizing, saving money, but they really need more support to invest in such that they can always loan themselves, but also do most of their work using the money that is collected and available in the communities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Agnes. And we still have 8 minutes that allow us for some questions. So I know that we have Yes, a microphone. Thank you, Sasha. So while you are reflecting, no, we have been going through the general big picture, no, understanding, no, the different barriers, the context of those institutional landscape, the climate finance. You have a question.
Thank you very much to the panelists for this very insightful knowledge that I've gained. I just want to pose a question to Agnes. Working with a rural woman is always very challenging, but also especially for entrepreneurs. You have talked about the finance, what finance has been able to do to you. Can you tell me a little bit about the multiple, whether your country has multiple taxations, and how have you been able to deal with that? Because for us in Nigeria, the rural woman who farms and wants to bring, the multiple taxations are something that is like killing. So how do you deal with these issues in your country?
Thank you so much. Let me take first the questions, and I'm going to take 3 questions, and then we close. The second question, I see you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the speakers. I think mine is not actually a question, but a little of disappointment on the slow progress some of these conversations are taking, because the fact we know, I'm Charles Kawusa from Uganda, I work with Regenerate Africa. The fact that we are working with the women and it is documented almost all over that these are disproportionately affected by the climate impact. But then the architectures of the climate finance is actually not taking that into consideration. The proportion is not proportion to the disproportionality. Because you know, this is a fact. You see them, the inequality, it is worsening, they are running in the landslides, we are struggling here and there. So the problem is access. Some of even the capacity might not be priority, because our women know how to keep the money even under the clothes here. So they know the language of money somehow, but they do not have access. The money is not there. I agree that we need to take a risk that you talked about. I think that was Lena or Liane. That risk, the way you risk, or the way we risk, anyway, I say you, I think maybe I saw Lena from GCF. The way there is a risk of these large cooperatives getting money without even any security should be some kind of, actually it is even less risky for these smaller organized groups at grassroots of women to just get some of this money and do local actions to respond to a number of all of these emergencies. So for me, it is a bit disappointing that we would be sharing lessons, but now we are again into the, even when we know at all levels, it is documented. So I am sorry, but I just felt that maybe we needed it yesterday. We need to fast track the process. We need to make sure the smaller grants go to the right people, channel them to women groups. And I don't see the complication or the science that is needed in that architecture. I am sorry, but that's what I feel passionate working with the women, especially in rural parts of Uganda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you so much for your comment. We're taking the last question, and then I will go to the panelists. Agnes might respond, and if others respond, please let me know for a quick question, quick answers.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the panelists. My name is Chioma from Nigeria. I'm also on the decks of the NDC. So I actually take the same view with Agnes from Uganda on the issues of women not having rights to land. That is a global concern as it is, because UNCCD, which is the United Nations Convention on Desertification and Drought, has actually made that known to the global community on the theme of this year's celebration for the World Desertification and Drought Day, which is about her right, her land, and scaling up restoration through gender equality. So my concern is this. We have been able to note that for seamless implementation of projects and programs or policies in Nigeria, there's no way gender cannot be mainstreamed. So we have gone ahead to mainstream gender in most of our national documents, like the NDCs, the LTS, and also on the issues of deep decarbonization programs. But my question is this: how do we measure progress from all these activities? Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much. Definitely time is not going to be enough at all to respond to those comments and those questions. And that's the magic of this, so that the conversation starts and lights up after as well of the event. And I would like to engage you to do that. I would like to give quickly Agnes the floor, but I invite you to continue. And then if other panelists have like a quick thought about what has been said on the answers, go ahead, Agnes.
Oh, thank you so much. I should tell you for taxes, that the issue of taxes is something that we've been lobbying and advocating for, but it is not yet coming through. We are trying to lobby for, subsidies around, say, for example, the technologies that we are implementing, for example, the panels, to have, the batteries, to have the government really reduce the taxes as much as possible to have some of these, technologies go through, but it's still an advocacy thing. And this is everywhere. For example, I can also tell you for sure that maybe for example, in agriculture, where you think for sure that we should have a lot of things, tax levied, but it is quite difficult, and those advocacy initiatives are still really there. So it is not anything simple, and it's not yet simplifying. Besides, we are women, so we are trying to make sure that if government could have a way of reducing taxes, to have some of these innovations scaled up, it would really be something good. But the advocacy efforts are still ongoing. So it's not anything. I should tell you that it's not anything simple, and it's still work in progress.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Regarding the monitoring and the reporting, I think it's important. I just want to highlight the necessity to make the link between the action we're making with a national NDCs, because I think it's important, because we have to report, and we have to report also on finance. So whatever finance we're going to receive, even if it's coming from GCF or bilateral, we need to report. So it's why also it's good to make it to keep a link between the NDCs, the NABs, and the finance we have it. Regarding how far we go on the reporting, I think many countries are actually finalizing the biennial report. So this is one aspect. People are starting, we start maybe by next year starting on the BTS. So this is also a channel really to get the information. So the issue is how at the national level we ensure that a gender plan is well integrated climate change. I think this is important. So, and ensure that in all sector, because you're talking about buildings, in all sector, we have this link within gender, which is action on the ground with gender. I think this is key. So this allows us to have really a way of taking all this information, because the issue is how to move from business as usual to something that is integrated totally climate change. So this is why I think this is really good to have this kind of example. It's good also to know that GCF is working on how to bring more grassroots finance, grassroots opportunity to access to finance, and I am totally okay with that. But I think also at the national level, we need really to look at how to make this integration with the planning at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the amazing panelists that we have had today. I think that gave us not only an overview, but really got into the details of many of the challenges, but also ways to move forward with concrete examples, with concrete demands that we can come. And as you were saying, no, this is something that we should be and must be talking in discussions such as the GST, Loss and Damage Fund. Knowing this reality is a call for action as well. Knowing about the different challenges is a call for action. We still have 1 week, but the way to look into different conclusions, into different decisions, is still going to be paved. And the way that it can be paved is with this collective advocacy work that can enable us to achieve those substantial changes that we really require as a way to move out of the multiple crises that we are experiencing right now. So with that great food for thoughts, we would like to close this session today, thanking everyone for being here on a Sunday, beautiful Sunday. Please do take Saturday, yeah, take rest with me. I'm going to take rest as well, so please do take rest, take care, and drink water. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anna, for connecting. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Have a great time.